Hey there, it's David with another holiday chat call. This time I've got Ryan who wants to talk about a construction business with lots of big equipment. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and then about the business, Ryan?
Absolutely. Thanks for the call. Uh, Again, Ryan, I'm from New Mexico, here in central New Mexico. Um, my background is actually, you know, in a past life would be architecture, and
Okay.
it quickly became evident maybe that's not going to yield what I wanted to yield in my life. I moved into land development, worked for some developers, and ended up uh, really enjoying the work of site development, especially the dirt and utilities aspect. It's pretty straightforward work. Uh, the hours, you leave it where you left it. You can make everything as stressful as you want, but I liked how these guys were operating, and so I ended up leaving a developer for one of our uh, contractors. So,
Okay.
yeah. So I've been there for several years, and um, have had some conversation with the owners that they're looking to exit. They're both in their mid 60s, uh, looking to make an exit, and it's the kind of business where it's not exactly easy to exit. It takes several special licenses. There's about four licenses that they have for the firm to operate to do what we do. So there's that. So I think maybe I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but there's a limited buyer pool for this kind of business. I think unless you're trying to acquire it, and for the life of me, I can't see myself acquiring another earthwork and utility business because I don't know what they would bring to the table other than old equipment. But for
Right.
me, it makes sense because uh, I think it makes sense to as a platform to kind of buy the business as it is and with the existing client base and relationships, employees, etc.
Yeah. Okay. So so tell me a little bit about we know that they basically some developer buys a piece of land and they want to subdivide it, and so that means putting in curbs and gutters and water pipelines, sewer, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And so that's what this company does. And so then the home building contractors can go in and build the houses, right?
Exactly. That's for the
Okay.
for the residential side, which is 90% of the work is definitely on the residential side as far as how it's constructed now as a company, but about 10% will be single one-off pads for commercial or single homes.
Okay. So
But
so
mostly tract development, correct?
okay, so the individual home builder could then call you up and say, "Hey, I want you guys to come and do the slab."
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Not
All right.
necessarily the slab, but we would do the dirt and the utility.
Okay, and then a concrete guy would come and do the slab.
Correct.
Okay. Okay, I got you. So tell me about the business then. What have the last few years been like as far as revenue and earnings?
They've been really good, and I'm not sure if that I'm not sure if that which makes this more complicated because I wish they hadn't been such blowout years, right? To use as the most recent numbers. But they've seen great growth. A lot of that is due to me coming on and another gentleman that we hired to work underneath me. I think we just brought we're more millennial. I'm a millennial. He's a Zoomer. We brought a slightly more technological savvy. I mean, I use Smartsheet scheduling. I'm I can run the survey equipment more efficiently. I
Hmm.
think that helped. So we've added on labor and it's been a success. But they've had a real good year, and then we're all booked out for another 2 years starting January. So
Oh,
as far
great.
as good, yeah.
Okay, so 25 and 26 are booked.
Hmm.
And what kind of revenue numbers is the business doing?
Uh, they I'll do round numbers.
Yeah, yeah.
In 2023, they did 5.5 million,
Hmm.
and this year we'll probably land around 6.2.
Okay.
And then
And have you calculated the seller's discretionary earnings or what other different numbers
yeah,
do you have?
I did the EBITDA and the
Okay.
SDE, and I they both landed very close to about 500,000, 550,000. Uh,
Okay.
and I get
That was which one?
that was what they were both right around there. They both happened to
So,
land really close, unless I'm doing them
so
wrong.
well, the different SDE and EBITDA are the same number. The only difference between the two is the fair market value of an owner manager.
Hmm.
So EBITDA is what's left over after the owner is paid a fair market wage, and SDE
Right.
includes that fair market wage.
Well, SDE, I had to back out, and this might actually add some clarity. I had to back out money out of the SDE because there are two owners that both take a salary. So I backed
That's right.
out about half of that.
Yeah, you only include one owner in SDE.
Right.
So your SDE is 550,000?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So 550 for the SDE, and what do you think all the equipment's worth?
Well, I think it's probably worth about 1.5. That might be a little too. Let me look at it this way. They've been depreciating off a 2 million number. There's about 500,000 worth of depreciation left. However, I think at an auction sale, I think they would walk away with about 800 to a million.
Okay. But but we're not talking about an auction. We're talking about, you know, fair
Probably
market
1 point.
value of this stuff.
Okay. I
So what do you think?
paid for one of those yet, but I think about 1.5.
Okay.
They're
Perfect.
very good maintenance regime, if that's the right word, but they definitely take care of it. It's all well loved uh, machinery, but it is old. It is old.
Yep. And is there any seasonality to the business, or being in New Mexico, do you kind of work
Uh,
around the year,
we get to
around the
work. We get to work around the clock. If you're working in a municipality like Albuquerque or Santa Fe, sometimes they make it more difficult to pour concrete, but there aren't any hard stops like you might find farther north.
Okay. So is the revenue then pretty even? Like, is this $6 million revenue business bringing in 500,000 a month?
Even, yeah,
Okay. All right. So that's great. What were you planning to do? You wanted to buy it outright?
I would. Well, they kind of want to stick around, and option A, what they'd like to do is a 33% sale to me,
Mhm.
and they're willing to owner finance or seller finance that bit, um, which I think makes sense.
What what are the terms like for the customers as far as collecting money? Can you walk me through the cash conversion cycle?
I don't. Uh, I don't know if I fully understand. It's due on receipts, but we do have accounts receivable uh, that can sit for 60, 90 days.
Okay.
But we bill out on a percentage of complete for the contract. So we will take on the material. We don't store a lot of material, but we do sometimes sit on billings that because the money flows through us back to our materials and our subs suppliers.
Okay,
But
so
maybe that's not the question.
well we got two different kinds of customers, right? So the one-off commercial building being built, right? And you go and you do the sewer installation on that site. You're probably going to be finished with that pretty quickly, like a few days and you're done, right?
Yes,
Okay. So when you guys go to do that job, you probably then issue the invoice when you're done.
correct.
And when would you expect that money to come in?
Uh, within 30 days.
Okay, so that one's pretty quick, right?
Mhm.
With 30 days later, you get a check. Um, would you be subject to retainage or holdback? Like, would a percentage of that be held back until the building is finished?
Uh, we don't see a lot of that on the bigger projects. That there's often a 5% holdback on that is held after the 11-month inspections from the authority having jurisdiction, whether it's a city or a county.
Okay. So that's a pretty small amount, but some of
Yeah,
these
it is.
things end up being delayed. Okay.
Yeah,
For for a subdivision build out, this is where you could be on site for several months, right?
yeah. They range from about 11 months to 1.5 years.
And so this is where you're doing the progress billing, and would you be billing at the end of each month?
Yes.
And when you do those projects and you issue that invoice, how long does it typically take to get paid?
With our current clients, they're still about 30 days.
Okay.
Pretty
So
good relationships.
so you said there's some receivables though going out 90 days. Is it significant then?
No, that's there's we all have those one or two troubled clients that
Okay.
somehow haven't trained well, or they have us trained. Um, but it'd be minimal,
So
less than
um,
10.
that would mean that because you're typically waiting 30 days for all of your things to be paid, on average, the business probably has about $500,000 of receivables at any given time. Is that accurate?
Yeah, we're sitting at about 450 right now.
Okay. All right. So what did it cost you to deliver that 500,000 worth of service?
Uh, I we are for good cost of goods sold and labor. I want to. I don't know if I can answer. I don't know if I know enough. Our
Well, well, the difference between your sales and the SDE, like the SDE is almost 10%.
Mhm.
So if you look at your cost of goods, your labor, as well as the overhead that needs to be paid every month that must exist in the company too, it probably cost $450,000 to deliver the 500,000 of service,
Yeah,
right?
that sounds right.
So in addition to the 1.5 million of equipment, this business also needs close to $500,000 of operating capital.
Hmm. For sure.
What do you know how much is spent on materials every year, like
About
pipes and things like that?
last year, we spent 2 million on cost of goods sold,
2 million.
and that
Okay.
it was about 1 million on labor last year.
Do you know what the payment terms are like with the suppliers? Are you paying people in 30 days or do you get
Uh,
longer?
we get a little bit longer, but we start getting phone calls after about 30 days.
Okay. So so that means on average your accounts payable is about 180.
Okay,
Would that be accurate?
that sounds right.
Okay. Yeah, because it's just 2 million divided by 12-ish.
Right.
So so AR is 500, AP is about 180. So 180 of the 500 of working capital is supplied by your vendors, by your suppliers.
Hmm.
So that there's a difference there of 320 of cash that's needed in this business to make it go. Okay. I'm just trying to get an idea of what
Yeah, yeah.
components are needed in here. Um, and so I think in the booking, you had mentioned something that you were thinking about an offer on this business. What were you thinking?
I For my layman research into business purchasing, I my understanding is heavy construction in what we do is probably a 2.5 multiplier uh, as a median. I think in the higher kind of quintile, maybe three, a three would be the to be top end. So we'll call it 2.5. I think the business is probably worth 1.5 million, but I I still, and I get that I need the equipment to do the work, but there's so much darn equipment. I can't. Maybe it's a zombie business, which it very well could be. Uh, that's just a frank discussion to have. But uh,
Well, let's let's
1.5.
talk let's talk about the equipment. Um, are there any items that don't get used much, or is it all being employed pretty much all the time?
There is probably 200,000 or 300,000 we could shed, but we do use them, and but it's just they're just convenience products. Like we have We have our own Mack truck that we use maybe once a month to move a piece of equipment around. So we can do it ourselves or pay someone else to move it. It's probably a wash as far as cost, but we're still sitting on the capital equipment.
Well, and it gives you flexibility because you're not relying on somebody else to show up.
Very, very flexible. You're right. There is value to the schedule. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. What what you're describing to me, like I was kind of hoping there for a minute when you were saying that the business was even year round, that there'd be a different kind of outcome here, but the scenario you're describing to me is one that I've seen over and over again with companies that have a lot of big expensive equipment. And it's more pronounced in the north when companies like yours would only be active for like 8 or 9 months of the year. Because then the 3 months of the year everything's just kind of parked unless it's being used for snow removal somehow, and not able to earn any money, right?
Right.
And what I've seen many times over the course of the years is that companies like this tend to sell for the value of their stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if there's stuff that really isn't needed, maybe the buyer doesn't buy that stuff and the seller sells it on their own.
Hmm.
Because the what and I mean I don't know the owners, but I've met enough people in this industry to know that people like who own businesses like this, they kind of have an affinity towards this stuff, the machinery
Yeah.
and stuff.
Yeah.
And if somebody down the road goes under and there's an auction, they go down there because they can buy something at 70% off what it would cost normally, and they bring it back. And even if they only use it 5 times a year, they still think it's great because they got such a good deal on it,
Right.
right? And but it represents part of their profit just kind of locked up in a piece of iron.
Yeah. Just yeah. Exactly. Until it's gone. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. The What about the clientele? Like, you, I'm guessing these neighborhood developments are a significantly bigger part of the revenue than the one-off
Oh,
construction site jobs.
very much so. Yeah. And I think it's it's part of this discussion. We have to have. I just wanted to avoid until till the end. I we have I think one client that is easily over 60% of our repeat, and there's a huge concentration in this client, and
Hmm.
and that's just part of this business at this scale. Yeah, yeah. But there's
Yeah.
a huge risk there.
And do you do any, would you be able to do like government contracts? Do you do any government contracts
Yeah,
or anything like
that's interesting. We are flanked by two national laboratories and an Air Force base. And I've
that? Okay.
actually been talking to the small business liaison at the Air Force Base, and I've got those kind of conversations happening. So I think there's uh, opportunity and probably a logical thing we need to do just to get some safety.
Yeah. What with a business like what you're describing, with one big customer and one big job every year, and everything kind of rides on one thing working out really well,
Mhm.
what you've got an opportunity there for a really catastrophic up and down in cash flow,
Yeah.
right? And so generally on a business like that, you don't want to see a highly leveraged balance sheet,
Mm.
because a commitment to pay, a big payment every month to a bank for a loan would be the net death knell of the business if
Right.
there was ever any interruption in one of these big clients. And so, businesses like that have that really choppy cash flow or the potential of choppy cash flow, they can still be great money making businesses. They might have an off year, every once in a while. Housing market goes down, they might have an off year, but typically what their balance sheet looks like is it looks like a lot more equity and a lot less debt.
Yeah.
Now, what is do you know what the debts of this business are right now? Do you have an idea what
Very,
what they owe? Okay.
very little. We have $250,000 in a couple newer pieces of machinery. I guess little is relative. I guess that feels little to me for
Oh, it
and they're
is.
yeah.
And
And go ahead.
this is exactly what I'm talking about, right? Like, these guys have $1.5 million of equipment. Probably, we've calculated
20
they
years
need
of
about
growth. Yeah.
Sorry.
It's just these things they've collected over the last 25 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Like these businesses build up and grow over time. They got $1.5 million of equipment. We've described that the business needs probably 320,000 in liquid operating capital, but I'm guessing they have more.
Yes.
Yeah, there's probably another couple hundred grand just of money there
Yeah.
to finance these ups and downs from one month to the next.
Hmm.
And so they have a very robust balance sheet. You know, where if I were to guess at their balance sheet, if we use the market value of their equipment 1.5 and we say they have another, I don't know, let's just say they had another 500,000 net of operating capital in there. That's 2 million, and they've got 250,000 of debt. That's a 1 to 7 debt to equity ratio. You know, normally debt to equity ratios are the other way. Like
Right.
if you borrowed 90% of this, you'd have a 9 to 1, $9 of debt for $1 of equity. They've got $1 of debt for every $7 of equity.
Hmm.
Very stable, rock solid balance sheet. And so uh, this allows this company to do well in this industry because if the one big customer said, I can't give you work this year, it would be disappointing, but they just
A
lay
little bit
off
of
some
runway to
guys.
go find other work. Yeah.
Yeah, and they'd go find other work. And if they had a bad year, they would, but then they'd come back somehow.
Right.
Right. And the
Right.
only way they can do that is because they don't have a big monthly payment.
Hmm.
And so um, let's talk about you. How much money do you have?
I have a, I'm prepared to bring about 300,000 in
Mhm.
US dollars.
Yeah.
Um,
So if let's just say you were going to buy this with an SBA loan and you were going to buy it as a share sale and you were going to buy it just paying them the value of the equipment, and let's say you bought the receivables position that, an extra 300 grand. Okay.
mhm.
If you were to buy it for 1.8 million, you put 300 down, you borrowed 1.5, you would have this big payment every month.
Yes.
And then you would also be paying this like a 10-year time frame.
Yeah.
And before the 10 years is up, you would need to
Have
replace
one
some
of
of
those
these items,
bad years too.
right?
Right.
You'd have to replace some of these other items. So so that probably is not the wisest solution.
Yeah.
There's I've seen a couple of different examples of how people do these deals. Um, One of them is what is being proposed to you.
The
So
seller.
yeah, so they make you a partner. They
Hmm.
sell you part of the shares. Um, the the valuation and what you pay to get into the business, it needs to be a complete business. So complete operating balance sheet that's properly capitalized with enough money in it, and you pay some money, and they're going to finance part of it probably as well. So you'll
Hmm.
pay some out of your profits out of the business, and then after, because in that situation you end up leveraged a little bit. You'll owe some money for some of the shares, but the business doesn't end up with any more leverage.
Right.
So the business continues to remain solid. And and then once you've finished paying off your shares, then maybe you do it again, right?
For
You
the
you
exit,
may
the final exit of them.
Yeah,
You're right.
well,
Sunset.
maybe they sell or finance another 20 or 30% of it to you. And then they do it a third time. And so it takes quite a while.
Right.
But essentially, what ends up happening is the profits that come out of the business,
Go
once
to
you
pay
own,
that.
yeah, once you own 33% of the shares, then 33% of any distributed dividends or distributions that come out of it are going to come to you.
Hmm.
And initially, you're going to use that extra money to pay off the
Service
note,
my debt to them. Yeah.
right? But then once you've done that, well, then you can do it again, and then you'll own 66% of the distributions. So you
Hmm.
should be able to pay off the next tranche even faster,
Right.
and then you can buy out the balance. And so that's sort of a longer process, but essentially the company ends up paying for itself.
Exactly. And that
Yeah.
was kind of the only way it felt accessible to me. I couldn't quite figure out that SBA would ever make sense. It would definitely not. I wouldn't be able to sleep very well. That's for sure.
It
But
would be super risky.
yeah, I
Definitely.
would rather they be sharing the risk for sure. Um, and I think they're willing to do that. I also think they're willing to take it the distance because they've both saved money. They're both very frugal. Kind of what's that millionaire next door term?
Yep.
They're paws. They're prodigious accumulators of wealth.
Yep.
Um, and all they want is for their wives to be looked after in some financial capacity. Have that extra bit of money coming in. Should they leave this plane of existence early?
Okay. Well, that is the other option. If they sold it, if you bought it from them and paid them your 300 grand, and let's say you paid 2 million for a fully capitalized company with operating capital and everything. And according to the cash flow, that's it's a pretty high price. That'd be almost four times
Yeah,
STE, but you're getting
that
a lot of
that would be the
stuff with
tippy
that.
top dollar, right? Yeah.
So if you did that and they held a 1.7 million dollar note,
Mhm.
but let's say it had a really low interest rate, maybe 4 or 5%,
Okay.
and let's say that the payments were somehow tied to the earnings of the business,
Yes.
right?
Like
So
90% of profit. I don't even know.
well, you can do that. You
Yeah, I
can
think that'd be great.
say,
I'd be
you
willing.
know, I'll pay you a certain percentage of the EBITDA on a monthly basis towards the note. And then if you have a rough spot and earnings go down, then that means your payments, slow down or stop.
We're both riding this horse together.
Yeah. Yeah. That's another option. A third thing that I've seen, and I spoke to somebody who did this, I think it was in the Southeast. I think it might have been like in Tennessee or Georgia. They did something very different. So what they did is they moved in with the company that was very much like this, and they started their own business. So if you can imagine starting your own new site prep company from their office. And what this person did is they bought a couple of the pieces of equipment from the seller,
Oh,
and both businesses operated side by side.
hmm,
And so some jobs were done by the new company, some jobs were done by the old company. And over the course of the years, the new company kept acquiring pieces from the old company
sure. Taking
and
larger
kept
larger contracts, larger.
and the
Yeah.
larger jobs, et cetera.
Uh-huh.
And it allowed the buyer to build their own balance sheet with their own earnings over the course of time. And the seller continued to enjoy some level of cash flow from the jobs that they were doing, but they were not buying any new replacement equipment. They
Their
weren't
office
doing
staff.
any of that kind of stuff. They were slowly retiring themselves and their fleet out of the industry and selling the units bit by bit to the new guy. And
Is the
I think they did it over 3 or 4 years.
okay? I Interesting. I'll have to mull that one over.
It is very different. When I heard the story, I was like, wow, it's the first time I've heard of someone doing that. I could definitely see how it would work. I think you run the risk of it being a little bit confusing, perhaps, to
Right.
customers.
And what was that
Uh,
kind of a like genesis of a trust issue between the buyer seller? Or
they
I feel
ran
like
right out of the same office, and from
we'll
what
be
my
fly on the
impression
wall for those
was,
conversations.
is that like they would discuss the jobs as they came in. Like, you want this one, or I should do this one. I have the capacity to do this. I'll take this one. Like, and the buyer would often help manage the other person's jobs too.
Right.
Like, they the issue here though is the licenses.
Yes. Now that I'm actually going to start taking my licenses underneath his license. That's what you do in New Mexico. You have a, a qualified party, and I've been doing the work for 2 years, so now I'm qualified to do the work or to start taking tests. So I'm gonna start doing that, and that's part of the value
Okay.
that the seller is also. That's it. We're New Mexico is kind of a weird patronage network, kind of slimy place. It'd be very hard to become a contractor in New Mexico if you didn't know somebody in the business, you know. But uh and I guess
That
that's
you know what that's called?
go ahead.
That's called regulatory capture.
Yeah, you don't know for
So
sure. Yeah.
yeah, because at some point in the history, somebody said, "Hey, we should be watching out about who does this kind of work. We need to bring in a licensing system." And then they asked the people in the industry what is important for this industry, and the first thing they said is, "Well, you got to have on the job experience."
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
in that moment, they locked out every other potential
For
new
sure.
entrant.
And I get it on one hand, but I'm off put by it on the other. But, but either here nor there, I am going to start that process. So that's I need to keep he and I's relationship in a good
Yeah,
spot. But and I intend to do so. We don't have any issues like that, but uh, something to think about.
yeah. So you also want to talk to um, an accountant about how you're going to structure
Mm.
this uh, acquisition of part of the shares, because you want to try to do it in as tax efficient method as possible.
Yeah,
So, for example, if you personally buy these shares and you personally borrow the money, the tax or the dividends or distributions coming out of this business are going to be taxable.
yeah.
Is it a C corp?
It is. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah. So this is a detail you're going to have to bring to your CPA to talk with, because how you buy this, you may need to end up setting up an entity that you own to be the acquiring body,
Okay.
so that entity is the one that owes the money to the sellers. So
Okay.
so that there isn't like an extra layer of taxation there. You want to be able to have the money coming out of the business be able to repay the note without being taxed as personal income if you can in some way.
Right. I've been kind of slow rolling my acquisition expenditures. I've paid for a third party evaluation study, so she's working on that now, and just so I have all the right firepower. Or she's just going to tell me. Who knows what she's going to tell me? I can't wait to get it so I can kind of bounce it off this conversation. But
Well,
but either way, the lawyer and the CPA are my next stops. But
yeah, the big issue with this is that um, if you say the business is worth three times STE, that would make it worth 1.65 million.
mhm.
And I haven't done research online to look at businesses of this size at all. But at 1.65 million, the sellers are going to look at you and say, well, if we collect our receivables and pay our payables and sell all the equipment, we'll end up with more.
Yeah,
Right. And
yeah,
they're right. And that's the
yeah,
problem. And so you asked in the very beginning, is this an example of a zombie business? Yeah,
yeah.
it is.
It is.
But it still produces a big amount of profit.
Right.
Right.
It works for me. Yeah, it's kind of two-way street. I'm probably the only logical exit plan for them, and for me, could be a logical entrance plan. Yeah, but
Yeah.
it'll be close, right?
So here's another idea. Okay. You said that there's some excess pieces of equipment that aren't used very often.
Hmm.
So could they be removed from this company and put into a different body? And then every time this company uses them, they pay rent.
Well, that's what yeah, I was thinking about that. Kind of, if the owners wanted to go that route, I mean, as far as the sellers maintaining a kind of quasi rental company.
Yeah.
Well, yeah,
Because
I think that makes sense. Yeah.
and the difference, of course, is that if you just rented from a real rental company, then you'd have the problems of scheduling and availability and all that kind of stuff. But if you kind of have your own
We have to own
attached rental
maintenance
company,
and catastrophic failure. But
yeah,
I I like that uh, as a concept. I'd like to talk more about with them. Mhm.
Yeah, because you could do that just for a few years and just say once I finish buying all the shares of the company, then the next thing I'll do is buy those pieces.
Mhm.
And maybe by that time they'll be depreciated more relatively, they'll be less expensive, but um, they'll at least get the value out of them. Uh, or if you don't want them, they can just be sold off. I'm just assuming things that aren't used very much and are parked in New Mexico probably don't age out
No,
and
they really don't. They last forever.
yeah,
No
yeah,
rust.
yeah. No salt on the road, no
Yeah, it's so
storms.
bad, but that's about it.
Yes.
Dry rot, but even then, that's minimal. Yeah. No, we're really
Yeah.
spoiled here.
Um,
Plastic covers everywhere.
you know, the yeah,
I can
I think
clarify.
that I think you
Nobody
should go
move here. We
after
don't want
this.
anyone.
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
I just wanted to clarify. I don't want anyone else to move here. We're good. We're all full. No more snowbirds. I'm just giving y'all a hard time. Northerners.
Um, I for for the problems of having so much value tied up that is not quite generating enough cash flow. Um, I think part of the solution is going to be the stuff that you're already working on.
Hmm.
Is there more work that could be done? Like, would you say the capacity of the business is maxed out?
No, I think I can bring some growth to it. And I think I already have as kind of as a as a wage slave. I've already kind of figured out some things. And I think I could bring on growth pretty quickly.
Yeah,
But
because if you can find another couple $1 million of sales,
mhm,
then my guess is that more than 10% of the next 2 million will fall to the bottom line
mhm,
because your overhead's already covered, right?
absolutely.
So so if let's say, closer to 20% falls to the bottom line, that'll be another 400,000. Now you're talking about an SDE of 950.
Mhm.
And at 3 times 950, you're talking about a price that's more than what all the assets are.
Right. And that's
So
probably honestly, that's probably where the logical value should that's where it should be if we were operating as an efficient business. Yeah. And
if you
and
were doing
and
more work,
a hungry business because they're not hungry. They're really not. They're great. They're doing great. They're ready to hang out on the beach.
well, yeah, and so there's a growth opportunity here. And if it did 2 more million a year in sales and the SDE did grow to 950, then then you're talking about an enterprise that has goodwill in it then.
Yeah. 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 My fear is because that's my first thought is like, well, I can, whatever that kind of meme is like, I can fix her or him. It's like, well, I can fix this company. And I don't want to be, I don't want to get myself into a situation that I regret so quickly.
Well,
But
the danger that people get into is they think I can fix it and then they go get that big SBA loan,
yeah, exactly. Exactly.
right? But if you get into this under terms that are
Mhm.
safer for you,
Yeah. Who's my
so
creditor?
yeah, so if they're the ones that are going to sell you their shares and they're going to lend you the money to buy most of it, like if you bring let's say you're going to buy the 33% of the shares for, and again, I keep referring to the business has to be properly capitalized. So if we say the price of that is 2 million, let's say you're going to pay 600 grand for your third, and you bring a couple hundred and they finance the other 400, right? Um, you are you need, as long as your salary and your share of the likely cash flow is going to service that debt for you, then you're going to be okay. If the business has a downturn, let's say in 28, and all of a sudden distributions get cut off because profit has fallen, your creditors are probably going to understand if you can't keep up the same payments,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
Because your creditors are your partners.
Right.
And so this is why I say, like, the terms of this deal are such that it removes part of that risk, even though we got the risky customer mix. The way
Hmm.
you're buying it reduces your risk.
Right.
And, you know, at the end of the day, this business has so many options if it ever went into a crisis, right? Like you could
Right.
start selling stuff
Exactly.
and raise money.
Yeah. Yeah. I like, there, I think we've talked about it at the start, but a 5 year exit is kind of what they're thinking. Um, One of them I know will go the distance, and he's the one that I need to. He's the one I need to learn from the most. So that's a good story. I think one might try to take his exit at like year three. Once he's comfortable that the business will continue to uh, pay his loan to me, I guess. Um,
So are the partners 50-50?
yes,
Yeah. So once you buy a third, are you going to buy kind of like equal shares from each of them? Is
yeah,
that the idea?
correct. One of them's going to retain 34%.
Okay. And
Yeah.
so you're going to buy that first third, and
Hmm.
then the guy who wants to leave earlier in
Hmm.
the second transaction, maybe you
Just
just
take
buy
him
him out
over.
completely,
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, yeah, I didn't think of that.
right?
Yeah,
So there's all kinds of different ways you can work it.
sure.
Because the guy who's more comfortable staying, it just means that he'll retain his third for longer and keep getting a third of the distributions.
Salary.
Like,
Yeah, yeah.
uh, well, but he may retire, right? Like after 3 years of you
Oh,
being their
third. Oh,
partner,
correct, correct. Yes, yes.
like they could retire from day to day and no longer collect a salary, but
Oh,
just
yeah,
get their distribution share.
correct. Uh, well, one of them is. Well, I don't want to give too. You can really narrow down on what the business on who the business is with any more information than that, probably, which is fine. But
Yeah, it's important when you get into a deal like this that people understand the difference between their role as an employee in the business versus their
yeah,
role as an owner. And
yes.
so you will, have to make sure that everyone's on a proper salary according to what they're doing in the business to
Hmm.
really delineate between their compensation for what they do in the business as workers versus, their role as a investor.
Hmm.
And a lot of businesses that I've talked with over the years, they'll be partners in the business and they're both just taking like the certain salary,
Hmm.
and one of them's doing more than the other, but they don't kind of ever reflect
We
on
never,
this.
we never
They
talked about it.
they just each take the same salary and then they divide
Oh,
the profit and they just think, well, we're each half owner, we each take half the money.
yeah,
But really, the person who's only working part time should be paid less of a salary.
right. Well, I don't think that conforms to our current global zeitgeist. There, paid for what you
Yeah,
do.
well,
I'm, I'm joshing.
I don't know if businesses that operate under those kinds of ideas do
It's
very
called the
well.
government.
Yeah.
Uh, that's what I should do is get a .gov business. How do I get one of those? Uh,
So yeah, anything else we were thinking about or wanted to talk about this business?
that was it. I just want to make sure that I'm not crazy or, well, I mean, we can't disprove that, but just make sure I'm not way out in left field. Um, so you've confirmed a lot of my fears, but also it sounds like it's not hopeless, or it sounds like, but it has to be a shared risk strategy that really gets it done.
Yeah. It's the key here is that the way the deal is done cannot put you in a situation where you have a highly leveraged balance sheet with an unforgiving creditor.
Yes.
Because if you suddenly found yourself in a position where you were paying like regular monthly payments to the bank, and then something happened with the one big job you do every year,
Yeah, done.
you'd be liquidating equipment to pay the bank. Like it would just be a black spiral.
Yeah. And then there's my ability to do the work. Yeah, it's just a spiral, like you say.
Yeah.
Huh. I guess I have a question about, and maybe this is just guru type nonsense, but bolt-on businesses.
Hmm.
I I think there's you kind of brought it up in a separate way, but I think there's an opportunity for renting out some of our equipment to others. Maybe I think we could acquire some smaller pieces as an experiment. You know, I, I try not. I'm a low debt guy, but I think we could get really good financing from Bobcat, get a couple Bobcats, and try a leasing business on the side. We have a full time mechanic and an office staff, so I don't see it's just one more spreadsheet. So that's an idea I've been
Hmm.
thinking about. And then a I would like to buy a septic installation business. I think that's the next kind of bolt-on acquisition. It's the same thing we do. We just don't have that license. It, it's another 2 year work underneath someone else's license. So I think if I could buy a septic business, I think I'd like to do that as well over the course of the next, however many years.
I
But
think it's a
logical bolt-ons.
perfectly, I think it's a perfectly natural extension, the
Yeah.
septic one.
Yeah.
Around here, most guys that do like water sewer are also the same guys that do septics.
Okay. Yeah. It makes sense. I mean, we're all we have all the equipment, we just don't have the license. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, as far as the rental goes, it is a different business,
Hmm.
but I think it can give you a strategic advantage because it can make extra equipment available to you that you control
Yeah.
that could be paying for itself when you're not using it.
It's kind of interesting. We own a very big equipment. We don't have any. We rent all of our small equipment, kind of like small track equipment. Yeah, that's kind of where it's probably because I'm still a 12-year-old in my heart, and I just want toys. But B, I do think there's money to be made there, but it is different business.
You'd have to look at the market. I mean, um, given the fact that you already have a site of some kind and you already have the mechanic and you've already got an office and all that kind of stuff, it could be very easily be a business that you guys decide to start.
Right,
The question would be, what pieces do you put in this rental fleet? And obviously, the first thing you think of is what are we renting?
right. Yes,
Then we
yeah,
won't have to
exactly.
rent it, right?
Right, exactly.
And and then but if you'd have to figure out when we're not using the stuff that we rent, who's going to be using it,
Right,
and go talk to some of those guys
right.
and see what pieces they're renting and when they're
Yeah.
renting it and get an idea of whether or not you'd be able to take a piece of that market.
One of our competitors rents equipment out from their yard. And I say competitor, they're more adjacent. They're about 60 miles away, but sometimes we will compete on the same jobs. I should probably just kind of sit one of them down for lunch and pick his brain.
Yeah, if they're willing to be open and share.
Exactly.
I've
If they're
I've
willing.
do you go to any kind of industry associations?
I,
Like, are there any
I
big trade
did when I was
shows?
in architecture, but I haven't been to the trade shows yet. There is there are there's the Urban Land Institute. I go to theirs. It's more developers, less builders, but there is a trade group that I need to join for the underground utility guys.
Because
Yeah.
if you can find somebody in another state who's also doing it, I've
Hmm.
found that those kinds of conversations are much
Yeah,
more
easier to
open.
happen. That's a good idea.
Yeah, because the person you're talking to doesn't think that you're going to eat their lunch, right?
Flying into Phoenix
Um,
to eat their lunch. Yeah.
yeah. The
Yeah.
and I don't know. Do you deal at all with like the dealers of some of the equipment that you buy? Those dealer
Mhm.
sales reps, they probably know other people in your industry. They're probably all local though, right? Like,
Pretty local, pretty small. Yeah, it's New Mexico's still a small town, but
yeah,
pretty local. A lot of those distributors are also rentals, so they
there you
might
go.
not
Okay.
want to. But they're
Yeah,
large equipment, not the
yeah,
small equipment.
yeah. I guess it'd be different. Okay. All right. I was just trying to think along
Yeah, yeah,
lines of relationships that you might already have.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, good luck. Let me know what happens.
Thank you so much, David. I really appreciate your time.
All right. Well, good luck. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Bye.
All right. Bye bye.